Welcome to another edition of Through the Smoke. This is a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. I'm Gabby Urrutia, one of your hosts of the podcast. David Lake on vacation in the Panhandle during spring break, having some technical difficulties as we were trying to work through this. So, just going to be me today, going through some recruiting topics that happened over the last week. Going through my first mock class, which I put on InsideTheU.com, where we're essentially taking a super early kind of shoot your shot type of projection to what Miami's 2026 recruiting class could potentially look like. So, going to dive into that a little bit. Going to dive into the addition of Jaylen Waters, Miami's most recent commit, and maybe even look ahead into this next week of spring football. So, but before we do that, I want to start off by, talking about our sponsors, Canes Connection, Miami's official NIL collective. They do an excellent job of establishing Miami as one of the premier college football programs when it comes to being able to acquire talent. We saw Miami go out in the winter transfer portal cycle, land a top 5 transfer class by really restructuring the secondary and going out and getting different impact players, quarterback Carson Beck. Miami's able to do those things because of the guys over at Canes Connection and the job that they do. So I would encourage you to go check those guys out, support them at any tier that best fits your needs, that best fits what you're able to do in order to contribute to Miami Hurricanes football effort. This is our way of being able to kind of partner with the University of Miami to help them acquire talent at an elite level, continue to acquire talent at an elite level. So definitely check out canesconnection.com. Also want to encourage you to check out the Mercerino Law Group. If you have been in a car accident, if you're injured in a car accident, I want to encourage you to call Nick Mercerino. He is a huge Miami fan. Would love to take your call. He would love to assist you with anything that you would need. And so you can give Nick a call at 561-960-9870, or you can visit his law group at themercerinolawgroup.com. Again, if you've been injured in a car accident, definitely want to encourage you to check out the Mercerino Law Group. They will definitely take care of you. So Miami's on spring break, no spring football. They went through the first week of spring football last week. They had a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday session. So there's still 12 practices that we have ahead. Right now, nothing going on this week as they use the first week to sort of acclimate. They will be back next Tuesday in action. But in the meantime, recruiting never sleeps. And Miami had a big recruiting addition to the class in Jaylen Waters, the top 247 cornerback out of Sefner Armwood in the Tampa area. I think that this is a big addition for the class, blue chip prospect at a program at Armwood. That's one of the premier programs in the Tampa area. So I think it's a really encouraging sign that the Hurricanes were able to go into a school that has traditionally sent guys to Florida, sent guys to Auburn, sent guys to USC, and pluck one and really just establish some footing, right? Last cycle, Miami goes into Armwood, takes 2 of their top prospects in running back Gerard Pringle and linebacker Kellen Wiley. So a lot to be excited about as far as Miami being able to go into the Tampa area and land elite talent. Jaylen Waters, a 6'2", 185-poundish cornerback with really, really long arms. Again, just the frame and what he could potentially project to in the future kind of checks all the boxes, right? Miami wants to continue to stack talent in the cornerback room. They've done a good job. The early returns on guys like Chris Ewald have been really strong. He's a local cornerback out of Chaminade Madonna, extremely battle tested. Jaylen Waters the same, playing some top competition over at Armwood, and he's someone that is extremely encouraging as far as when you project what this defensive backs class could look like. Jaylen Waters is a guy that they have prioritized, was committed to Florida, never stopped recruiting him. Will Harris, the former Florida defensive backs coach, he makes the move down to Miami. He's able to, again, help Miami get, finally cross the finish line, right? Flip him from Florida. So, I think a couple interesting things to kind of note with Jaylen Waters. He is one of maybe, I don't know how many recruits fall into this category, but he has given a commitment to each of Florida State, Florida, and now Miami. So he has been committed verbally, non-binding verbal commitment to all 3 of Florida's big 3 schools. Not sure if that has happened before. And I think naturally there will be some questions like how much do we have to kind of watch this one if he's already, made a few decisions prior to this one? How sure can we be that he sticks with this one? And look, this is recruiting. This is an ever fluid process. I will say that Miami has long been prioritizing Jaylen Waters. This wasn't a flash in the pan flip. This wasn't something that happened overnight. Jaylen Waters was a regular visitor at Miami in the fall when they were playing games at Hard Rock Stadium. He got back in January, right before the February dead period. Was back for during this first week of spring practice in March, and Miami was finally able to cross the finish line there. So yes, naturally, I think that there will be some concern. I think maybe this is one situation that you just have to kind of continue to monitor because of just the nature of how unique that is. Um, but in general, I think Miami has laid groundwork here, right? This isn't something that just came out of left field that he just decided to sort of flip over. So I feel pretty good about Miami's chances at this point to cross the finish line with Jaylen Waters. Now, again, this is recruiting, and we'll see what happens. But where things currently stand right now, I think Miami should be considered, the school most likely to sign Jaylen Waters. Again, long cornerback in that 6'2" range, 180-ish pounds, had every national offer that you could ask for. So I think that this is, again, just a strong addition to Miami's class. Currently 5 commitments in the group. This is a group that ranks, I think, top 25-ish at the moment. We know that Mario Cristobal is going to want to kind of continue to push this thing. Miami signed the number 13 recruiting class during the 2025 recruiting cycle. Look for Miami to work to get back into the top 10 after a 10-win season. This is the first time that Mario Cristobal has really recruited with some on-field production in his back pocket. And I think where Miami's class stands right now with just 5 prospects in, the average ranking per recruit, this is averaged by the industry-generated 24/7 Sports Composite, is very, very strong. I think the average is somewhere around the 93 grade, which is well above the threshold of blue chip status, which would just be 90. So Miami's not only acquiring quality pieces right now, but these guys are ranked, highly, and these are guys that are just going to continue to kind of progress as they work through their senior year. So I think a good ground floor of this 2026 recruiting class is kind of in place, and I think that this is just a start, right? I think there's a lot that Miami still wants to accomplish in the defensive backfield. As you look through the state of Florida, I think there are a lot of really good options. You have Chauncey Kennon over at Sarasota Booker. You have Justice Fitzpatrick at Fort Lauderdale St. Thomas Aquinas. You have CJ Branaugh, a rising cornerback out of the Orlando area who is generating a ton of Power 5 interest after testing off the charts at Under Armour Orlando. You got Jaylen Waters, a good in-state target. And then with Zach Etheridge and Will Harris on board, Miami is becoming more and more and more active in sort of the Atlanta metro area. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as we kind of go through the mock draft. So, but I think just in general, what Jaylen Waters brings is kind of what Miami just, again, needs to kind of continue to stack. We talked about the young guys like the CJ, Chris Ewald. We talked about the guy like Jabari Antoine, who's recovering from some, lower extremity injury. But again, I think there's some reasons to be positive about where things are going there. And then just the guys that they have coming in. I mean, the OJ Frederic, a guy who can play man corner on the outside. Xavier Lucas, a guy who can play man coverage on the outside. Ethan O'Connor, guys like Charles Brantley. Miami needs to add more of those types of cornerbacks if they want to take that next step defensively. And I think they're doing a good job of bringing in those quality guys. And again, I think Jaylen Waters kind of checks off those boxes as a long corner who can make plays on the ball, but who still has some work to do. Again, I think it's fair to say there's maybe some questions about just the general overall speed metrics, and maybe that's why he's not ranked maybe higher than he is, because I think that's a fair question regarding Jaylen Waters. But still, what Jaylen Waters brings from a physicality standpoint, already being in that 6'2" range, already being in that 180 pound range, these are all really encouraging signs about what this could potentially look like down the line. And we got to remember too, these kids are still in the spring of their junior seasons, so there's still a long way to go in their development. But again, I really love this addition of Jaylen Waters for Miami. I think that these are the types of corners that Miami has needed over the past few cycles that they haven't necessarily gotten, and it seems like it's starting to trend towards Miami landing these different types of guys. So with that being said, I want to transition into my mock class. This is something I love doing. It's very early. It's an impossible practice. I like to call it an impossible practice. I am way more likely to miss than I am to hit. It's not meant to be perfect. This is meant to be sort of fun. I think the way that I kind of approach the mock class too is just where do things kind of stand right now, almost, is kind of how I have to approach it, right? Because I can't project what things are going to look like. At the same time, I think it's also fair to say that these recruiting cycles are kind of shortening up, right? So we've talked about this before on the podcast, but it seems like you almost have to have your, or schools really just in general, just what's happening is that schools are getting their recruiting classes done sort of in like the summer months, right? You're seeing a lot of guys schedule their official visits to 4 or 5 schools in sometime between May and June. Really just to that second to last week of June. I think the last week of June is a dead period, so there's no contact from that point through the month of July, which is again that's a new change too that we'll discuss when the time kind of comes. But these recruiting cycles are expedited. So these spring visits and what we know about the class right now, we don't not that it's going to be over like done and set in stone. Kids aren't signing in the summer, but a majority of schools hope to have, let's call it 80 to 85, maybe 90% of the recruiting class kind of intact as far as just the form of it. And, you have to work the rest of the way to whether that be flip guys or make sure you hold on to the guys that you have committed. But I think a spring mock class for me, it almost feels appropriate to kind of just start shooting our shot. So, let's talk about that class a little bit. So, again, for those of you who haven't checked it out fully, you can find it at insideview.com. If you go on the Through the Smoke message board, you will find it pinned up at the top. The 1.0 mock class just means it's the first one of this cycle. I'll do a few more down the line. But just this group that I kind of put together here, just some of the details, maybe finer details of just what it ended up looking like. So this is a 27-player class, which is, I think it would be slightly bigger than the class that they just signed, but kind of on par with the first 2 classes. I believe those were 26 and 26 as far as just I believe it's the 2023 recruiting class and the 2024 recruiting class were about that size. And I'm not saying that this is where we're going because I haven't heard this for sure yet, but I would anticipate maybe um, just a bigger class in general as college football continues to kind of trend towards the 105 as far as just that being the official roster size, moving up from 85 to 105 as far. And again, I don't know all the intricacies of that, but essentially, I think it would be eliminating some of the walk-on opportunities. But essentially, schools are at some point over the next couple of years going to have a roster size of 105 prospects. So 27, if we're projecting to that, might even be a little small. Like we could end up seeing some larger recruiting classes as some of these schools prep towards or start building towards having 105 players on scholarship. So this class specifically, 27 players, 14 on offense, 13 players on defense. So let's start at the top, right? Let's just go through it. I started with Miami already has their quarterback of the class in Darion Coleman. The Orlando Jones signal caller led them to a 14-1 season. Fell in the state championship game to Plantation American Heritage, led by Malachi Toney, who is producing as a true freshman slot here early on in spring football. And I think plenty are encouraged about the way that things are trending there for the reclassified early enrollee freshman. So he's doing some special things early on. But Darion Coleman is Miami's quarterback commitment. That's who they have in the class. And again, that quarterback situation isn't something I really see a ton of movement or anticipate a ton of movement at. Got 2 running backs in the class, Javion Mallory and Derek Cooper. Those are 2 South Florida native defensive backs. Javion Mallory out of Boca Raton, West Boca. Derek Cooper, of course, the top athlete out of Chaminade Madonna, has national offers. I think another interesting part of it, I put 4 wide receivers in this class. I think Miami wants to get bigger at receiver. So 3 of those receivers are over 6 foot. I added a slot receiver in Jason Lopez, a couple of tight ends in Hezi Kent. I think we need to talk about Hezi Kent a little bit more. I just want to go through the class first, and I think maybe we can break it down in chunks. Hezi Kent out of Georgia, Luke Sorensen out of California are my 2 tight ends. I put together, a 6-man offensive line class headlined by 5-star Kenya Pepe. Ryan Moret would be Miami's center of the class. Another ING product in Brett Collegier is another guy projected into the class along the interior to go with Ben Cogden, the recent tackle commit. Defense, and look, I think it's worth saying, just as we kind of go through the offense a little bit, I think the offense might be, not saying this is going to be perfect again, but I do think the offense is maybe easier to project at this point of the cycle I think receiver is a little dicey. I think receiver is definitely the one I struggled with. I think that's the one that has room for the most variable as far as just things maybe not looking exactly like this. Again, I don't expect really much of this to look the way that it ends up looking, but just based on my understanding and my knowledge of some of these situations, there's just more staff continuity on offense. So I think we just have a better read on where things are at with some of the offensive guys. While on the defensive side, there was four changes as far as just a new defensive coordinator in Corey Heatherman, who's now the linebackers coach, between Zach Etheridge, who is the defensive backs coach, primarily working with the cornerbacks, Will Harris, who came over from Florida, is working with the safeties, and Damian Lewis, who's working with the defensive tackles, who came over from Colorado to even go along with Kerry Joseph. He was the cornerbacks coach at Jacksonville State and is now working with the Nickels at Miami. So I think with each of these, defensive situations, this is very much a work in progress. And I think that these are just a lot of names that we know Miami's high on right now, but I think still a lot of work to kind of be done there. So went with three defensive tackles. One is struggled to say the name, Tamuhini Topui, an Oregon commit out of Mater Dei in California. Miami's extremely high on this kid. Don't be surprised if he's around campus sometime soon. I think that there is a chance that he could be around at some point, potentially as early as this weekend. I believe he's expected to be a part of a big West Coast group that is coming for a 5-on-5 event in Broward County. So Miami has been very, very high on, again, the Oregon commit out of Mater Dei. And if they're able to get him on campus this weekend, that would be a good next step in in Miami's recruitment of him as they kind of progress to work to maybe pull him away from the Ducks, pull him away from USC, who's the sort of local school who's also working hard to kind of get him on campus. James Johnson, I think by the time that this podcast airs, I think the news will probably be out that he is transferring to Miami Northwestern. So James Johnson, again, a big interior defensive lineman here right now in Southwest Florida, but maybe making his way over to Dade County to play his senior year. Keyshawn Stansel, an out-of-state interior defensive lineman out of North Carolina. Edge, I think that's still, as far as defensive end edge, I think that's still a position that's work in progress. Got a couple guys there. I want to talk about linebacker a little bit. Jordan Campbell, Miami already has one commitment there. And the second linebacker I threw in there was Tyler Atkinson. So he is one of the top, if not the top linebacker prospects. Maybe he's the number 2 linebacker in the country. For us at 24/7 Sports out of Loganville, Grayson, one of the top prospects in the country, regardless of position, but definitely one of the top linebackers. Linebackers definitely hard to project because of just the defensive changes, and I think just in general nationally, it seems like kind of like a top heavy linebacker class with guys like Tyler Atkinson, Xavier Griffin, who are really really high up on the board. To me, linebacker is a position that Miami absolutely needs to address this cycle and needs to find a way to hit on. Right, I think they need a similar. Again, early returns on Kellen Wiley, you mentioned him with the Armwood crew, are very positive as far as just being a long, reactionary, athletic linebacker. I think Miami needs to stack more of those types of guys. Pulling up Tyler Atkinson's profile here, 6'2", 210 pounds. Again, has just been a multi-year contributor at a prominent program in Atlanta. I think what's interesting about Tyler Atkinson, and look, I went very low confidence score. I went with a 2 on that confidence score. Not saying I expect this to happen, but I think Miami's always due for a surprise or two a cycle. I think we've come to know that with Mario Cristobal, whether it be landing, again, a Hayden Lowe, flipping him from USC, the 5-star edge. That was something no one really saw coming. Miami was able to get that done. So I think it's fair to project Miami pulling something crazy, especially with linebacker, I think being such a position that Miami needs to hit on as far as just landing, big time early contributors who have, high ceilings, high floors. And I think Tyler Atkinson checks off those boxes. He's an Adidas athlete. He is signed with Adidas. He has an Adidas brand deal. Not saying he is again bound to that. I think that maybe expires once he's done with high school and he goes off to college and all that stuff. But again, Miami is a premier Adidas school. Like Miami and Adidas have a great relationship, and Miami is one of like their top programs as far as just investment and how much Adidas invests into Miami. So not saying that the brands could make any contributions here or like if that could be a factor, but I do think it's interesting that there is that kind of tie where Miami is an Adidas school. Tyler Atkinson is a top target for Miami. And again, just saying that would be a cool little tie. So if I'm shooting a really, really early shot on a guy that maybe Miami's able to get done, maybe Tyler Atkinson's a guy to know there. I think a couple other names, maybe at linebacker. You're going to mention Xavier Griffin, committed to USC right now. USC's gotten some really early commitments from some Southeast prospects, specifically in the state of Georgia, and have not been able to hold on. So Xavier Griffin's certainly a guy that Miami could go after. I think Jermichael Garrett, again, rising senior who currently plays at his high school football in Auburn, Alabama. He's committed to Auburn, but I think Miami's trying to shoot their shot there, and he's another guy that I think would be a good fit. I think that's maybe one that I maybe kind of regretted maybe not putting in my mock class. If I was just taking an early shot and projecting someone big that could potentially end up in Miami's class, I think Jermichael Garrett is definitely an interesting candidate as well. Another position I highly focused on was the secondary. Again, we've talked about this at length about just how important I believe the secondary is as far as just stacking, right? Miami did a good job in the portal, again, getting multi-year guys, but I think that this is still a position that you need to develop from the high school ranks. So a six-man defensive backs class, Miami already has two of them committed, right? Jaylen Waters and Camden Portis, as we mentioned earlier. Again, we mentioned some of those Atlanta area defensive backs. I put three of them in this mock class, just thinking that Zach Etheridge, who's an Atlanta native, goes into his hometown, his home area, an area he recruited at a high level when he was at Auburn. Got a few notable commitments from Atlanta area defensive backs to go with him to Auburn. Now, mind you, I think that's a more natural transition, Atlanta to Auburn. But I think early on in during spring practice, Miami hosted I think it was two Atlanta area defensive backs during the first week of spring practice. Now, during the second week of spring practice next week, you got a few more of those guys. Two of them I actually put on this mock class, Jontavius Weinman and Cortez Redding. Both those guys out of Jonesboro, Georgia. Again, about 35 minutes or so from, I guess, down whatever Google Maps decides is the center of Atlanta. Wherever they kind of pinpoint that. So not far, really just on the outskirts of Atlanta. And then Blake Stewart, he's one of the guys that visited during the first week. He's out of Atlanta Woodward Academy, so a school that has, again, produced multiple Power 5 talents over the course of the years. Those are three of the guys that I had in this mock class, along with Justice Fitzpatrick, the local blue chip defensive back. He was also on campus during the first week of spring football. And he is the little brother of all-pro safety Minkah Fitzpatrick, who Mario Cristobal helped recruit to Alabama when he was an assistant for the Crimson Tide and Nick Saban. I don't know, I think it was like 11 years ago at this point. So just a long-standing relationship with the Fitzpatrick family and Mario Cristobal that I think could help them ultimately keep one of South Florida's top players home. So again, I think just as you kind of look at what it means, this essentially what this group would be Miami signing a top 10 class. So I think the way it is right now, the rankings will change a lot, of course, throughout the course of the cycle. As I throw all these names into the class calculator, which if you're not familiar with it on 24/7 Sports InsideU.com, you can basically build out your own dream class or your own mock class, and it will punch out a score for you of what that class would look like. And you can compare it to years past, which is essentially the same thing I do. And, it'll kind of tell you where that class would traditionally fall on any given cycle. And you can come up with an average essentially of like, hey, this would essentially be what this would be by that metric would be essentially a top 5 class. Miami would secure a top 5 class more likely than not, with the ceiling based on the past 5 years. This could be up to like the number 3 class in the country. So again, but the rankings will change a lot, and that will fluctuate the impact of some of these additions versus others. And so yeah, I think it's important to go through some of the key things that I think Miami would need to do here. So who are some of the guys in this mock class that I feel like Miami needs to get? I think that just who are some of the high impact players as Miami goes to this class of 2026 that were like, hey, yeah, there's obviously maybe some wiggle room here or there, but if I had to pick out a group of guys that I feel like Miami needed to get, position groups that I felt like Miami needed to get, to me, it starts with Derek Cooper at running back. I think Miami has found, I think just through the high school recruiting ranks, a couple high impact running backs. I'm a big believer in Jordan Lyle out of St. Thomas Aquinas. Big believer in Mark Fletcher out of American Heritage. I think both those guys are future NFL running backs. Love Gerard Pringle, who Miami signed again out of Armwood last cycle. He's a freshman. Early returns is that he is adjusting very well. But Derek, and then I think bringing in Derek Cooper right behind Gerard Pringle, I think just gives you another high upside potential NFL talent at running back. So Derek Cooper would be one of the guys who I think Miami needs to land in this recruiting class. Calvin Russell, the 6'5", nearly 200-pound wide receiver out of Miami Northwestern, is definitely another guy that I would add to that. I think these are guys. I think Calvin Russell, just being a big, long outside receiver, is just. I think it just continues to give you that flavor in this offense, right? Like Miami right now has one receiver, I guess two receivers that are like over 6'2" or 6'3", and that's CJ Daniels, the veteran LSU transfer who only has 1 year left. And then you got true freshman Josh Moore, who's in the 6'4", let's say 210-pound range. Super encouraging, but you want to continue to again stack those types of guys. And Calvin Russell's an elite talent, elite ball skills, and I think that there's just so much upside there with Calvin Russell. So I think that that's one I think Miami would need to get. Kenye Pepe, I think Miami needs to dip back into that well of just getting elite tackles, right? Miami got Francis Mawanoa a few cycles ago. He's been a steady kind of presence at right tackle and is probably going to be a 3-and-out guy who gets, potentially drafted in the first round after this season. I think Miami has a chance to go back into the elite high school ranks and find an elite tackle, whether that be Kenye Pepe or even the Jackson Cantwell, the number one offensive tackle prospect in the country, who Miami's very much in the thick of. So I think both those guys are two huge opportunities for the Hurricanes to kind of get back on track. As far as, not to say that there's not, starter level tackles on the roster or that they haven't recruited starter level tackles. I just think those high impact, high NFL upside type of tackles. I think Kenye Pepe and Jackson Cantwell are kind of in another tier. For me on defense, it's hard to pick one, but I think one of these premier defensive tackles, right? Whether that be Tomohini Topui or whether that be James Johnson, I think both those guys are essential. Tyler Atkinson, a high level linebacker, I think is a big deal. A guy like, I think even Justice Fitzpatrick, I think would be a huge addition. You look at him, I think he has a lot of versatility, plays a lot of cornerback at high school. I think he maybe projects best as a safety. That's me talking. I think we have him listed as a cornerback, but I think he could potentially be a safety type of guy or a guy who can you can move him around a little bit. So I think those are a few guys. I think someone like Hezi Kent, right? Like I think he's, the tight end, mentioned him before. I think he's someone that a lot of people have a lot of questions about, right? He's listed at, what do we got him listed at? We got him listed at 6'5", 300 pounds. Now, I do think I think his weight has fluctuated a lot. Depending on what season he's in. He visited Miami during the fall. I think he was over 300 pounds. I heard, in January during the contact period that he was weighing in around 285 pounds. Really at this point, virtually every single recruiting service has him listed as an offensive tackle and a high level offensive tackle. For us at 24/7 Sports, he's a number 160 overall player, the number 13 offensive tackle prospect in the class of 2026. So a lot of people, and I get messaged and peppered about this just from people nationally, like, oh, hey, does Miami really think that Hezi Kent is a potential tight end? My answer is yes. And yeah, you know what? That may be unconventional thinking. Maybe that's not the way that everybody sees it. But what I will say is that Miami is absolutely invested in recruiting Hezi Kent as a tight end. They had him in camp, I guess, last summer. So this past July, they had him in, the most recent, July 2024, had him in camp. They tested him as a tight end. They let him run. I think they felt good about the way that he moved around, the time that he ran. Again, and this is, if he's committed to playing tight ends, he's gonna have to shed some weight. Again, let's say best case scenario, he is 285 pounds right now. He might need to get down again, really maybe another 10 or 15 pounds. And what he's gonna be is essentially a jumbo athlete, right? He's a guy, if you turn on the tape, he can catch and run. And again, is he going to be able to do that against college defenders? I think that's maybe to be determined, but I think Miami's willing to invest in him as a primarily inline tight end that maybe gives you some short yardage, red zone flexibility as far as just being a reliable pass catcher and a sneaky athlete. Again, really for his size, a plus athlete. There's not a lot of guys that are moving around the way that Hezi Kent does at his size. And again, Miami's all in here. Miami's all in on recruiting Hezi Kent as a tight end. And I think that puts Miami in a unique position in his recruitment, because I think there's a lot of people that would love Hezi Kent, but maybe are not willing to do the tight end thing with him. And I think Miami being one of the schools that is committed to that, I think it puts them at the top of his recruitment, near the top of his recruitment. My understanding is that Florida is another school that's really in the thick of it with Hezi Kent too. But I do think that Miami is in a really, really strong um, position with Hezi Kent. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at with the mock class. Um, I think that there's more that I kind of gave as far as just what the intricacies of this class are. Again, just more in depth, more detail about this class. Again, really want to encourage you to check out InsideView.com. We have so much great content on there, whether that be spring practice, whether that be recruiting coverage, and again, I think we do a really good job of just wall to wall coverage of the Miami Hurricanes. So definitely, I definitely think you should give us a shot. If you haven't already, if you're not already subscribed, if you like what we're talking about even here today, just kind of going through all this, and I'm kind of freestyling this, right? I usually got David on the other side kind of peppering me. We're going back and forth. So, again, this is just me sort of rambling in a lot of ways about this mock class, about where Miami's kind of at right now. And again, just what I think is encouraging about where we are right now is just the way that Miami's kind of positioning themselves to, again, go on another strong run. And the fact that they found those results on the field, I think will position them to acquire a lot of these guys. And if it's not these specific guys, I just think guys of this quality that I think fans are going to end up being happy about the results, because I do think from my perspective, I feel like there is more national interest in the Hurricanes from top prospects than there have been in years past. I think early on in Mario Cristobal's tenure, he kind of got by with the excitement factor of what Miami could be. And I think guys bought in early to what he was doing. But I think now Mario Cristobal is proving nationally that he's established the program. And no, you know what? Did the 2024 season end the way everyone had hoped? Definitely not. But I think, you pull back the lens a little bit. And I think that there's a lot to be encouraged about the way that 2024 season went, as far as just winning 10 games. I think that was a huge milestone that Miami needed to reach. And there was just, it was really at their fingertips as far as just winning 11, 12 games, potentially going on a playoff run and competing for an ACC championship. That was right there. So I think Miami's showing that they're trending in the right direction. And I think, this roster is as well-rounded as it's been. One of the topics we're going to talk about, just is there a particular position group that we want to monitor that we should monitor this cycle? I think every year or so, again, Miami wants to build a well-rounded roster, but I think that there's always those positions of emphasis, right? And I think some of the ones that come to mind with me, and I kind of touched on this when I was kind of breaking down basically the 5 guys that I felt like in my mock class we needed to get, but definitely a receiver or receivers with size. I mentioned that there was 4 receivers in the mock class. 3 of them were over 6 foot. The other receivers I threw in there, Corey Barber out of Alabama. Miami's done a good job in the state of Alabama. And Corey Barber, he's out of Birmingham. Spain Park has national options. I think Miami's going to be one of those schools that gets a visit this spring, and likely in position to get an official visit in the summer. Miami signed Dalen Upshaw out of Phoenix City Central. Early returns on him are very positive. Corey Barber, I think, is a little bigger of a version of Dalen Upshaw as far as just having maybe a little bit more size, but a lot of the same explosive traits that I think are worth investing in. And then, so he's in the 6'1" range. And then a guy like Samari Nwingo out of St. Augustine, he's in the 6'3" range, 180 pounds. So maybe a little bit more slight, but again, as a receiver with size. So I think that specifically is a position or traits that we need to find in receivers. And if Miami's able to reel in 3 guys that are over 6 foot, I think that would be a win. An offensive tackle that could, again, immediately compete for a starting job. Definitely touched on that with Kenya Pepe and Jackson Cantwell. I think a big one is a top 100 defensive tackle. I think that is the one position that Miami hasn't hit consistently enough at. And look, I think Justin Scott, 2 cycles ago, the 5-star out of the Chicago area, was a massive, massive, massive win for Miami. But the big time programs are adding guys like Justin Scott year after year after year. Sometimes 1 or 2, or sometimes those guys get multiple of them. When we're talking the Ohio States, the Georgias, the Alabamas, and now those guys don't grow on trees. So the top end ones are as coveted as any other position, and it's hard to get your hands on sort of those dancing bears type of interior defensive tackles. But I think that this is the year that Miami needs to getting a phone call on the back end. But this is the year that Miami needs to sort of go in there and land these types of guys. Again, I think that there's going to be a really good in-state local option in James Johnson, who again may be making that move down to Dade County. I think Keyshawn Stansel out of North Carolina is a guy that Miami really likes. I think they have a great footing with at this point in the process. I think he's someone that's worth sort of investing in, thinking about. Tamuhini Topi, I think, again, is a guy from the West Coast committed to Oregon. That's a steep one, but I think he's someone that Miami needs to kind of continue to invest in. I think Bodney Cleveland, another guy out of Birmingham Parker that Miami's highly invested in. I think he's another one that's on the table for Miami. He's another top 50 or so recruit that I think the Hurricanes need to, find a way to kind of get into that one. So, and there are others, but I think that it's a top priority for Miami to go into that defensive tackle market and emerge with one of these top 100 guys who can be, again, an early sort of impact player for the Hurricanes to kind of, continue to line those guys up. I think Miami's roster, this current roster has as many of those guys as Miami's had, between Justin Scott, who's again 6'4", over 300 pounds, maybe 310, 305 pounds. You got Ahmad Moten, who's in that 6'3". Maybe I think he's under 310 pounds this year after playing at like 320 last year. So he looks as athletic and as powerful as ever. You got a guy like David Blay, who transferred in from Louisiana Tech, who's in that same like kind of 6'3", 305 pound range, 305, 310 pound range, that I think has a chance. So Miami needs to continue to stack those types of guys, not only because, getting them at the high school level and developing them is the ideal route, but they're also very expensive if you need to go into the transfer portal and find those types of guys. So I think it's important to acquire and develop those guys at the high school level. So yeah, and then I think just a deep secondary class, I think, is another really big key one as Miami kind of continues to navigate this thing, as well as, again, a big linebacker. So again, as there's a lot of things, and it's very early in the recruiting cycle as Miami kind of works through all of these different things. So again, I think that there's a lot to be encouraged about when it comes to Miami actually accomplishing a lot of these things. Last thing I want to touch on today, just some of the early returns, early feedback on a couple of Miami's new assistant coaches, specifically Zach Etheridge and Will Harris. Both those guys come into Miami with, strong resumes as far as just the ability to acquire and develop talent. I think Zach Etheridge has maybe more of the track record of being able to acquire the talent, while with Will Harris maybe has more of the track record of developing the talent. But I think early returns, and I kind of said this a little bit earlier, but to me, it seems like what's opening up to Miami is the Atlanta Metro, especially when it comes to defensive backs. And look, I think Georgia is producing as good of athletes as any state in the country right now. You're seeing the Bulldogs ascend. You're seeing schools go into the Atlanta area, or just into Georgia in general, and find guys that are making plays and making a difference at other college programs early on. So I think establishing some footing in the 404 and the surrounding areas is big. And where I see the most impact with Zach Etheridge is just really in just the Atlanta area guys that he's attracting to Miami. I think, mention a guy like Jontavius Wyman out of Jonesboro. He's a guy Miami's been working on, but again, will be on campus next week. And Zach Etheridge, just having that connection, I think, helped push it further along. Same thing with a guy like Cortez Redding, who is a safety that, again, I think Zach Etheridge, Will Harris are going to have a chance to kind of help navigate. The Blake Stewarts out of the Atlanta area, Tyreek Green out of Buford, which again is an Atlanta area power, a Georgia power. A lot of SEC and major programs are coming after Tyreek Green, and Miami's right up there with Ohio State and Georgia and Tennessee and some of the other schools that are still going after some of these guys. So I think a lot of that kind of opens up. And I think just Will Harris in general, coming from Florida, I think he already had a strong pulse on a lot of like the Southeast defensive backs. And I think we're seeing that with, the Blake Stewarts and, other guys that I think Will Harris will eventually, work and get to Miami. So yeah, again, I think the track record of Will Harris and his development and everything he did at Washington, I think during his stint at Washington, 8 defensive backs got drafted or landed on NFL rosters. 2 of his defensive backs at Washington signed extensions or got big contracts this offseason. There was one who plays for the Chargers. I can't remember his name. I think it was Elijah Molden. And then Byron Murphy, who I think got a big contract from the Vikings or re-signed with the Vikings on a big contract. So these guys are not only getting to the league, but they're also, they're excelling in the league. Trent McDuffie, the Chiefs' #1 cornerback, was developed by Will Harris at Washington. So I just think there's a really strong track record there. And the talent is currently in place now for Will Harris and Zach Etheridge to capitalize on a lot of that stuff. If you look at Auburn, who's a program, who hasn't seen the on-field results, but, as you project, a year or two down the line, I think there's some solid young pieces, especially in the secondary between Jalen Crawford. There's a safety that ended up starting for them the back half of the season. And I think one or two other guys who were significant players for them, that Zach Etheridge was either the primary or the secondary recruiter on. So I think Zach Etheridge and Will Harris both have the ability to acquire talent and both have the ability to get that talent and actually get them ready to play and get on the field and have them be impactful. So again, I think where Miami's at right now, I think they have the benefit of being able to acquire guys and not have to get them on the field super early, like maybe a program like Auburn had to. But I think really there's a lot of, to me, I like where things stand at just in the secondary recruiting, especially when you kind of consider year over year, and that's not shade at anyone else. I just really like the duo of Zach Etheridge and Will Harris, and really what those both those guys do on the back end. So again, this next coming week, I'm still on spring break, so I think really probably starting Saturday, this coming Saturday, expect to see some guys on campus. As I kind of teased earlier, there's a big group coming in for a 5-on-5 tournament, which is kind of the line of scrimmage version of or variation of 7-on-7 football. So basically offensive linemen versus defensive linemen, one-on-one settings of just like, left tackle on defensive end, all those types of things. It's kind of a new thing. I haven't even really been to one, but excited to see this. But there's gonna be a lot of line of scrimmage players from the West Coast. I believe there's a group coming from the Carolinas that's supposed to be pretty talented, and then a lot of local guys as well. So I think on Saturday, expect to see a lot of different guys on campus. #1 interior offensive lineman Darius Gray out of Virginia. He's the guy that's expected in. Keep an eye out for Tomohini Topi. I think that there's a chance that maybe he's able to swing by campus if the schedules line up and the stars align and there's just a window for him to get down here. I think that would be a big win for Miami if they're able to get him on campus. And then even kind of looking ahead into next week, you're going to have guys like Johnny Jones, the top 247 offensive tackle out of Tampa Berkeley. You're going to have Ian Premer, the #2 tight end in the country out of Kansas. And even going into next weekend, you're going to see James Johnson, the top defensive tackle here in the Sunshine State. He's going to be on campus alongside a host of other guys. So just want to encourage you again to get to InsideTheU.com. We have this wall-to-wall covered. I hope you liked this solo ranting podcast. Again, kind of freestyled it. So if it is jumbled or it sounds all over the place, I apologize about that. Really wanted to get something out to you guys this week. And I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. And again, stay locked into Through the Smoke. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you are catching this podcast on. And we will talk to you guys soon. Thank you.